All the footage you just saw was taken with the RS3 Mini, my Canon EOS R, and this RF 24-70 2.8. I really love these speed ramping techniques and I couldn't wait to try them out myself. Anyways, I didn't have to film long until I ran into some issues with this bad boy, but we'll come to that later. If this is your first time in this channel, welcome. My name is Julian. I make a lot of gear reviews, travel videos, vlogs and tutorials, so if you're into that kind of stuff, make sure to subscribe. With that out of the way, I was super excited when I heard that DJI had come up with the mini version of their gimbals, because that was one thing that pushed me away from them before. The bulkiness and the lack of practicality. This is actually a very lightweight gimbal, weighing at only 795 grams, that is even less than this lens that I have here. But despite that, according to DJI, it is supposed to carry up to 2 kilograms of weight. And when I saw that, I was hyped. I use a Canon EOS R which weighs 660 grams, and that camera in comparison to this lens, which is 900 grams, is about 1560 grams. So that is way below the 2 kilogram limit that DJI says. So I thought I was good to go and went ahead and ordered the gimbal. It cost me 389 euros and it came 4 days after I had ordered it, which is quite good in my opinion, knowing that these days all companies are having problems with their supply chains. It's quite interesting that DJI can actually deliver you a brand new product 1 week after it's released with only 4 days waiting time. Respect for that. Anyways, I put the lens and my camera together and then I was mounting it on the gimbal. And when I was trying to put the camera on the gimbal and balance it, I noticed that in order to get it in balance I had to push the axis almost completely to the limit. And that made me a bit suspicious already. But anyways, after I finished balancing the gimbal, I noticed that it was pushed quite to the limits, but it was still carrying my camera, so I was happy until now, and that's great news. But it didn't take long for the bad news to come in. When I tried to tilt the camera upwards more than 90 degrees, I noticed that with the viewfinder of the camera I was almost touching the base of the gimbal here. I think that has something to do with my setup being quite front heavy, then I have to push it quite back on this axis on the gimbal, and that brings it closer here, and when you point it upwards or down then it brings it closer there. So I don't think that problem will exist with all the setups, but it exists with my lens and camera combination. And that made me really worried actually, because if I'm filming somewhere and I want to switch from holding the camera above the gimbal to holding it below, then it could be that I forget during the process and then I hit it quite hard and then I damage my camera. So that made me really worried. I wanted to say this first because if someone out there is counting on this gimbal to carry a payload between 1.5 and 2 kilograms, that it's gonna be really tricky, and I am personally not sure yet if it's a compromise that I'm willing to make, which means always being careful when moving the gimbal not to damage my camera. So now that you know this big flaw that I see with this drone with my setup, if that won't be a problem for you, then let's continue this review, because you might have found a very good gimbal actually. The first thing I wanted to talk about in this review is the physical aspect and the design of this gimbal. As already mentioned, it is quite lightweight and quite small, so it's very easy to fit somewhere and to carry it around. This extended grip here can be removed, and if I do that, then it can easily fold and go into the back pocket of my bag. But because my camera backpack has a dedicated pocket for gimbals, I can even leave this grip attached to the gimbal, just fold the arms and then it will fit perfectly into that pocket. So all I would have to do when I go somewhere is just take it out, balance it and ready to go. I don't need to remove things, I don't need to remove parts and to assemble anything. That is one of the strongest points for me for this gimbal. And also the materials feel really good, the switches feel premium and it seems like it could last a long time. It doesn't feel completely like it could handle anything you throw on its way, but in my opinion in that aspect it's more than good enough. When it comes to the battery grip, it's not removable like the other DJI gimbals, so you can't really switch them during the shoot. But it still carries up to 10 hours of battery, which should be enough for most cases for the whole day. Let me turn it off a little bit. One thing that I love about it is that you can actually lock this axis into place. So just by using this switch here, now this is locked. Now I can also lock the second arm, and then now I only have this arm that is moving and the others are fixed. The reason why I love that is first because if I leave it turned off, then I can just put it like, and it's not perfectly balanced, then I can just do it like that by closing the arms. Second of all, If I want to balance the gimbal, I don't have to deal with all three axes at the same time, because that can be quite confusing, and I can just lock two of them and then deal with the axis one at a time. For example, move this back and forth until I find the balance, and then I lock these two, and then I adjust the second one, and then the third one, and so on. Now, this is not the first gimbal that DJI is doing this to, but it's really nice to see that this mechanism is also making it to the RS3 Mini. You also have this quick release plate here, which you can attach to the camera, and then just slide the camera with this thing in and out the gimbal. If you want to, for example, change either the memory card or the battery, and then you can just go back in, fix it in place, and you're ready to go. Another thing that is also interesting is that with this gimbal you don't actually need a camera cage to mount it to the camera and then turn the camera vertically. What you can do is remove both of these plates by releasing them here. Just slide it out of the arm and then just slide it back into the vertical axis and fix it in place like that. You will probably have to rebalance the gimbal again, but I find it really cool that this mechanism exists and that it is so easy to switch. Let me get back to the horizontal axis now. Another thing that you get with the RS3 Mini is this NATO expansion port, where you can mount one of those arms to help you carry the gimbal in different directions. Now let's talk a little bit in depth about all the functions that these buttons here and dials have, as well as the touch screen. If you just want to see the practical test about how this gimbal reacts when it comes to vlogging, then feel free to use the chapters below to navigate to that part and skip all of these technicalities. Now I'm just making a water break to wait for those people to skip this part of the video. Let's start this review with the joystick that is right here. With this joystick you can turn the camera up, down, left or right. The next thing is the power button, which is located here to the side. If you press and hold, you can turn the gimbal on and off. If you just short press once or twice, you can put the motors into sleep mode, and in this mode they don't react, they don't work anymore. They just leave the camera hang free. Also, when the gimbal is turned off and you just short press it, you can see the battery level. The next button is located below the touch screen. Here it's the M button. With this button you can change and navigate through 3 different modes that this gimbal has. If you press and hold the M button and then double press the trigger in the front, then you can enter the gimbal into sports mode. In this mode the gimbal just tracks the subjects faster. If you press and hold the M button and the trigger together at the same time, then you can enter the gimbal into auto tune. If you press the trigger twice, you can turn the gimbal into the default position where the camera is facing forwards. And if you press it 3 times, then you can go into selfie mode. I think that's really neat and easy to use, especially when you're vlogging. You can just switch from one mode to the other very fast. If you press and hold the trigger, then the gimbal will enter into the locked mode. In this mode you can just turn it in every direction that you want. Well, the camera will just always point in the same direction. That's also really cool. Now let's move to the record button. If you connect the gimbal via Bluetooth to the camera, then you can use this button to press record or to stop recording. And you can also autofocus if you press this button halfway. But also, if your camera allows it, if you press and hold this button, then you can take pictures. These are all really cool features in my opinion. The last thing is this front dial here, and this is used to manually focus the camera or to zoom in and out. But I think in order for this to work you need some extra accessories. Now let's come to the touchscreen. At the top here we have the mode that we are in, whether the camera is connected to the gimbal via Bluetooth or not, and whether it's connected via cable. On the left here we have the auto tune menu. You should use that after you're done balancing the gimbal. And also down here you can control the stiffness of each axis individually. On the right here we have the balance status. This shows you whether you balance the camera correctly. Green means that it's well balanced, orange it's not so well, and red it means that it's very poorly balanced and you need to do it and you need to rebalance it again. If you click in here, then you can see which axis is having trouble in which direction. Then on the bottom left we have the follow mode. PF stands for pan follow, which means that the pan axis follows the movement of the grip while the other 2 axes stay in place. PTF stands for pan tilt follow, which means that the pan and the tilt axis follow the movement of the grip, and FPV mode is where all 3 axes follow the movement of the grip. Then you also have a custom mode where you can choose yourself which axis you want to follow the grip. And the last mode is the 3D roll 360. This mode makes the camera face upwards like that, and then you can film something and rotate it 360 degrees. And then on the bottom right corner you have follow speed, which is at what speed you want the gimbal to follow you. Now if you slide upwards, then you come to gimbal settings screen. The joystick speed allows you to control the speed of the joystick for the gimbal. Here you can select from fast, medium, slow and custom. Joystick smoothness allows user to control the sensitivity of the gimbal. The lower the smoothness value, the more sensitive the movement of the gimbal. Now we come to dial functions. This allows you to set the function for the front dial. You can choose this dial to control the focus, zoom, ISO, aperture, shutter speed, roll axis, pan axis and tilt axis. And the last thing is the dial speed. You can tap this to set the response speed and smoothness for the front dial. Now if you slide down on the screen, you come to control center screen. On the top left corner we have the screen lock. If you tap the screen lock, you can lock the touchscreen to avoid unexpected operation. Then on the top right we have Bluetooth. If you tap on the Bluetooth icon, then you can connect this gimbal to the camera. Then on the bottom left corner we have silent mode. If you enable it, you can turn off sounds including the alert tone. Now we come to settings. Disable selfie is that if you push this gimbal 3 times, then the gimbal won't enter into selfie mode, which means that it won't turn into your direction. Then we have orbit follow. It is supposed to make the camera movement smoother if you are orbiting around an object. For the push mode is that you can manually move the axis of the gimbal and then it will stay in the place that you moved it. Otherwise, if you don't have this enabled, it will resist and come back to the place where it was. The horizontal calibration is used if the gimbal is steady but not in a leveled surface, like this. Moving on, we have gimbal auto check. With this you can analyze the hardware status of the gimbal. And then below this you'll find things like language and device info, which you'll probably never need. Now that we are done with this boring part, let's head outside and test the gimbal practically for a vlogging test. For this test I'm going to use the RF 16mm f2.8 from Canon together with my Canon EOS R and the Rode Video Mic Pro. It's also very interesting to see how this gimbal can perform when you have a camera which doesn't have in-body image stabilization and also a lens which is not stabilized. So without losing any more time, let's go outside. So we're starting the test with a walk. I'm just walking normally and showing you around. From what I can see from the screen, this footage actually seems pretty stable. I'm going to begin the test with a slow walk, and I'm trying to walk quite carefully. Let's see if that point it a bit down, and let's see if trying to keep the arm steady helps. Now this is casual walking when I'm trying to rush a little bit and I'm not really paying attention to what the gimbal is doing. So the electronic stabilization is now turned on, it's not on enhanced. I can feel some jittering on the gimbal, but I don't know if that shows in camera. That's why I also wanted to do this test with the electronic stabilization turned on. So now I'm walking carefully, and now I'll try to walk carelessly, not really paying attention to the gimbal, and see what that looks like. Alright, now another test that I want to make, and for this one I will keep the electronic stabilization turned on. I want to do a running test to see how well this gimbal can handle running. I've made this kind of test before with a GoPro, and that actually did pretty well. But let's see if I can do the same thing with my camera right now and this gimbal. Alright, let's go. Trying to keep it steady and running. See what that looks like. So now the electronic stabilization is turned off, only the gimbal is doing all the stabilizing work. Let's go. Switch hands. When it comes to the weight, I think this is actually doable. When I stretch the arm like this for a long time, I can actually feel the weight. It gets a bit heavy. Sorry, I'm running out of breath. So it gets a bit heavy when I keep the arm stretched, but like this, I mean, it's a workout still, but if I change it from one arm to the other from time to time, it should be alright. It should be more than doable actually. By the way, also to give you an impression of what I'm looking at, this is it, this is my setup. That's my arm, that's the gimbal right there. I got the microphone on top, and yeah. Alright, now that you've seen the footage yourself, let's try to come to some sort of conclusion. I think if you have a setup of 1.5 kilograms or less, which is also not very front heavy, then this gimbal could actually be perfect for your needs. Now that I also reviewed the footage, I could really say that I love the stabilization of this gimbal and also other things like practicality, lightweight, size, features, as well as user friendliness. I think in that sense this is a very good gimbal. I think this is actually a perfect gimbal for content creators because they usually film with lighter setups, with lighter camera setups, but even with their smartphones sometimes. And it can do that very well. You can even do full frame cameras if you don't use a very big lens with it without problem at all. But if you are a filmmaker or an aspiring filmmaker, then I think you should skip this gimbal. The reason is because you always want to have the best camera and the best lens to use with it. And even if your setup is actually within the weight limits, just the fact that this gimbal is very small, as I already showed you, will cause problems at some point because you will want to put a lot of accessories to it. So I think you should pass on this one and go and get one of the more professional gimbals. Personally, I'm still not 100% sure yet because I love the practicality and the lightweight, and I can't make a decision right now, but I'm 90% sure that I will return it and get a better one. Not that it's a bad gimbal, it's a great gimbal, it's just not exactly for what I need, and I feel like I'm making a lot of compromises if I were to keep it. Alright, thank you very much for staying till the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a thumbs up, leave your comments below if you have any questions, and subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss any of these kind of videos in the future.